Some stories don't begin with betrayal. They begin with loss, the kind that crushes a chest so deeply that breathing feels like a negotiation with the world. For Aditi Sharma, grief arrived in the form of a phone call one rainy November evening, informing her that her parents, Rajesh and Kavita Sharma, had died together in a crash on the Mumbai-Nashik Expressway. A jackknifed truck, a slick road, and 2 lives gone before anyone could understand what happened. For a couple who spent 40-plus years walking side by side, people said there was a strange, poetic symmetry in the fact that they left the world the same way. Aditi was 36. Her younger sister, Ria, was 32. Suddenly, the two of them were left navigating a world that no longer contained the people who raised them. Aditi handled the crisis the only way she knew how, by organizing, holding herself together, and burying her panic under layers of responsibility. She coordinated calls, arranged ceremonies, and received relatives flying in from Delhi, Bengaluru, Chennai, and Hyderabad. And through all of this, her husband of 6 years, Karan Malhotra, became the constant everyone praised. Calm, responsible, efficient. He handled hotel bookings, transportation, reception arrangements, every exhausting detail that grief made impossible for Aditi to process. People called him the ideal son-in-law. Aditi believed that too. Ria, on the other hand, spiraled. She had always been emotionally intense, the sister who felt everything loudly and dramatically. She cried into Aditi's shoulder, breaking down at random hours, devastated by the idea of a world without their parents. Aditi held her night after night, whispering, "We'll figure it out, Ria. We still have each other." Ria hugged her tightly, gulping through tears, "I don't know what I'd do without you, Didi." Those words would take on a terrifying irony later. The funeral was scheduled for 2 weeks later in Pune, where their parents had deep community ties. Around 200 people were expected, former students of Rajesh Sharma, nurses who had worked alongside Kavita, neighbors, colleagues, childhood friends. For Aditi, the planning became her lifeline. For Karan, it became an opportunity to appear indispensable. For Ria, it became an escape, a way to lean on her older sister as she always had. No one, not even Aditi, had any idea how drastically the dynamic was about to change. For days before the funeral, Aditi drove to her parents' home in Nashik to begin sorting through their personal belongings. Walking into the quiet house felt like stepping into a museum of memories, her father's reading glasses on the table, her mother's shawl still draped over the arm of the sofa. The silence was suffocating. Midway through the morning, while preparing coffee in the kitchen, something caught her attention. A ceramic mug with Karen's company logo, a personalized one, gifted to employees at a past corporate event. She froze, recognizing it instantly. Why would Karen's mug be in her parents' home? He hadn't been here since before the accident. Confused, she opened the dishwasher. Inside were 2 plates with dried food, 2 wine glasses, and another mug, not hers, not her parents'. A strange chill went through her. Someone had been in the house. Recently. She moved through each room, her pulse picking up. In the living room, she found a blanket that definitely belonged to her own Mumbai home, a wedding gift she and Karan received years ago. Upstairs, the guest bed was rumpled. An iPhone charger sat on the nightstand. Neither of her parents used an iPhone. Her hands trembled now. In the bathroom trash, she found an empty condom wrapper. Aditi sat on the edge of her parents' bed, vision blurring. A wave of nausea rolled through her as reality came into focus far too clearly. Someone had been using her parents' home for sex. While she grieved. While she planned the funeral. While she trusted the people closest to her. She dialed Karan. When she asked if he'd been at the house, he hesitated. Lied. Faltered. Then hung up when she pushed harder. Her stomach dropped. Next, she called Ria. Ria's silence said everything. Finally, in a trembling whisper, Aditi asked, "Tell me you weren't there with Karan." Ria's voice cracked. "Didi, I can explain." Aditi ended the call. The truth settled like poison in her veins. Her husband, her sister, in her parents' home. For 6 months. The betrayal was brutal, but what hurt more was where it happened. In the house where she learned to walk, where her parents prayed every night, where family meant something. Aditi drove home in a daze. Karen was waiting. What followed shattered the remains of her marriage. Karen looked fragile when she walked in, pacing, agitated, rehearsing the words he'd been dreading to say. He didn't deny it. He didn't even attempt to soften it. He said plainly, "Ria and I have been seeing each other for 6 months." The world tilted. She felt the ground disappear beneath her. She asked one question, voice hoarse with disbelief. "In my parents' house?" He dropped his gaze. The shame arrived too late. Then he said the one sentence Aditi would never forget. "I want a divorce. I love Ria. We want to be together." For days before the funeral of her parents. For days before Aditi was expected to stand before 200 mourners looking composed and dignified. Karen left that night, suitcase in hand, heading straight to Ria's apartment. Aditi collapsed into herself, losing 3 days to numbness, unable to eat, unable to sleep. Calls from relatives went unanswered. She started drowning in grief layered on betrayal. By Thursday morning, something inside her shifted. She woke with a terrifying clarity and decided the truth needed to be seen. Not hidden, not softened, not delayed. She would not let her sister and her husband stand at her parents' funeral pretending to be supportive family members. Everyone would know. Everyone would see. By evening, she had built a presentation, a precise, organized breakdown of their affair. Text messages, call logs, security camera footage from the Nashik house, every time-stamped entry that proved their betrayal. She placed it all on a USB drive and waited for Saturday. The day of the funeral in Pune arrived under a heavy gray sky. As Aditi dressed, black sari, simple jewelry, her mother's pearl earrings, she felt strangely calm. Hollow, but controlled. Relatives whispered about how strong she looked. They had no idea. By noon, people began filling the community hall. Flowers lined the stage, candles flickered, framed photos of Rajesh and Kavita were placed at the front. Ria arrived at 1:30 p.m. Karen arrived minutes later. They kept distance between them, but Aditi saw the exchanged glances. The guilt, the panic simmering just beneath the surface. "Didi, can we talk?" Ria whispered, trembling. After the funeral, Aditi replied gently, with a calm that frightened Ria more than anger would have. At 2 p.m., the service began. Eulogies filled the room, memories of Rajesh's kindness, Kavita's devotion, their 40-year partnership. Then it was Aditi's turn. She walked to the podium slowly, carrying the USB drive like it was a blade. She began softly, reminiscing about her parents' values, honesty, loyalty, family. Everyone nodded. Ria cried into a tissue. The screen behind Aditi lit up. At first, childhood photos of Aditi and Ria laughing, hugging, holding hands at birthdays and school functions. Then Aditi said the words that cracked the room open. "My sister has always been part of my life. She has always been close to me. And for the last 6 months, she has also been very close to my husband, Karen." Gasps erupted. Before anyone could process, Aditi clicked to the next slide. Screenshots. Hundreds. Romantic messages. Explicit messages. Plans for the future. Lies told behind Aditi's back. Dates. Times. Photos. Ria stood up abruptly, her legs shaking, face drained of color. The room erupted. Aditi continued, unwavering. "While I was grieving, arranging this funeral, visiting my parents' home, my husband and my sister were meeting there, sleeping there, in the bed my parents shared for decades." Security camera footage rolled next. Karen and Ria entering the Nashik house together. Karen locking the door. Ria carrying a bag. The timestamps painfully recent. 3 days before the funeral. The hall descended into chaos. Relatives shouting. People gasping. A few crying. Several standing in shock. Ria sobbed and ran out of the hall. Karen chased after her. Neither looked back. Aditi unplugged the USB drive and walked off stage. She had said what she needed to say. The truth was no longer hers to carry alone. The hall emptied slowly, but the shock lingered long after the last pair of footsteps faded into the parking lot. The speeches that were supposed to honor Rajesh and Kavita Sharma had been overshadowed by a truth no one saw coming. Yet, in a strange way, Aditi felt that the truth itself honored them more honestly than a polished, peaceful ceremony ever could. Her parents had lived lives rooted in integrity, and exposing betrayal in their name felt like a final tribute to their values. When Aditi stepped outside the hall, she was met with a mix of anger, sympathy, and stunned silence. Some relatives hugged her tightly, whispering, "You did the right thing," while others avoided her, uncomfortable with the public unraveling of a family scandal. A few murmured that the funeral wasn't the place for such revelations, but even they couldn't bring themselves to defend Ria or Karen. The truth had been too stark, too raw, too undeniable. The burial, held in a quiet corner of the Pune cemetery, was far more intimate than anyone expected. Only those who genuinely cared for Rajesh and Kavita stayed, around 50 people, solemn, supportive, grounded. They helped Aditi lower the urns into the earth, offered gentle words, and shared small stories of her parents' kindness. For a brief hour, the chaos of the funeral hall felt distant, replaced by something quieter, purer. Afterward, Aditi walked alone between the rows of gravestones. The sky was turning orange with the setting sun, casting long shadows that stretched across the ground like threads connecting the living to the lost. She felt the weight of everything, the grief, the betrayal, the exhaustion, press into her bones. She wished her parents were alive to guide her through this, to tell her she wasn't alone, to remind her of the strength they had spent a lifetime nurturing in her. The reception back at the hall was subdued. People approached her hesitantly, unsure what to say. Some relatives who had always favored Ria kept their distance, not wanting to take sides too openly. Others hovered protectively near Aditi, asking if she had eaten, offering to stay with her for the night. One elderly neighbor of her parents clasped her hand and said, "Your mother would have been proud. She believed in truth more than anything." But pride didn't comfort Aditi that night. When she returned to her apartment in Mumbai, the silence inside hit her like a tidal wave. It was the first time she stepped inside knowing Karen would never return. The familiarity of their shared space now felt foreign, like walking through someone else's life. She removed her jewelry slowly, then sat on the edge of her bed and finally let the tears come. Not the shaky, controlled tears she had learned to hide, but deep, gut-twisting sobs that left her gasping. In the following days, messages flooded her phone, relatives checking in, friends offering support, even strangers who'd heard the story from someone who had attended the funeral. But among the countless messages, two numbers remained unanswered, Ria's and Karen's. Voicemails poured in from Ria, each one more desperate than the last. "Didi, please talk to me. I never meant to hurt you this way. Let me explain. I'm begging you." Aditi deleted them all. Her decision wasn't out of anger anymore. It was out of self-preservation. She had given enough chances, enough love, enough forgiveness in her life. She had nothing left to give to the two people who had shattered her marriage and her trust in the span of 6 unforgiving months. When Karen filed for divorce a month later, Aditi signed the papers without hesitation. No alimony demands, no disputes over belongings. She wanted nothing connected to him to remain in her life. She gave him everything he needed to move out, even let him decide the dates. The sooner he walked out, the faster she could breathe again. 3 months after the funeral, word reached her that Karen and Ria had moved into a rented apartment in Thane. Some relatives whispered about it. Others pretended not to know. But Aditi didn't react. Their choices no longer belonged in her world. Her grief settled into something quiet, something she could live with. The betrayal, once a roaring fire, faded into distant embers that no longer burned her. What remained was clarity, fragile but unmistakable. She had saved herself. The months after the divorce felt like learning to walk again, one slow step at a time. Aditi focused on rebuilding her routines, waking early, cooking meals she liked, reigniting hobbies she had abandoned during her marriage. She returned to work with renewed focus, pouring herself into projects that kept her mind engaged. Her dedication didn't go unnoticed. 3 months later, she received a significant promotion. It was the first time in months she felt truly proud of herself. Travel became her escape. She spent a quiet week in Fort Kochi, wandering through antique shops and old churches, drinking coffee on balconies overlooking the sea. She read books she had once collected but never found time for. She sat alone at restaurants and realized she enjoyed her own company more than she had ever admitted. From Kerala, she went to Dharamshala, spending her mornings hiking along pine-scented trails and evenings in meditation halls listening to soft Tibetan chants. Her nights were peaceful for the first time since the funeral. Her mind no longer replayed memories she couldn't bear. When she returned to Mumbai, she began therapy with Dr. Meera Deshpande. The sessions were difficult at first. Aditi was used to being the strong one, the problem solver, the emotional anchor. Opening up felt like peeling away layers she had built over a lifetime. But Dr. Meera had a quiet, steady presence that made vulnerability feel less frightening. One afternoon, during a session that lingered on the heavy side of honesty, Dr. Meera asked gently, "Do you regret revealing everything at the funeral?" Aditi took a long breath. "Sometimes I wonder if I should have waited," she admitted. "But then I remember how they stood there, ready to pretend everything was normal, while using my parents' home for their affair. And I think my parents deserve to have the truth spoken in their name." Dr. Meera nodded. "You didn't do it to punish them. You did it to free yourself." Aditi felt tears sting her eyes. "Yes, for years, I carried everyone's emotions. I cleaned up every mess. But this time, I refused. Healing wasn't linear. There were days she woke up calm and centered, and days when a simple memory, her mother's laugh, her father's handwriting, made her crumble. Yet gradually, she learned to let the pain pass through her instead of drowning in it. One of the turning points came unexpectedly during a grocery run. While selecting tomatoes at a supermarket in Bandra, she spotted Ria across the aisle. Ria's hair was tied back, her face gaunt, her sari wrinkled. She looked like someone weighed down by choices she couldn't undo. When their eyes met, Ria froze. The guilt in her expression was unmistakable. After a moment of hesitation, Ria turned and hurried away, leaving her basket behind. Aditi stood still. She didn't chase. She didn't shake. She didn't feel hatred or longing. She felt neutral. And for Aditi, that neutrality was freedom, the final proof that healing had begun. 2 years after the funeral, life introduced Aditi to someone she never expected. Arjun Khanna, an architect with warm eyes, a thoughtful nature, and a quiet resilience shaped by his own past heartbreak. They met through a mutual friend at a small dinner gathering, where Arjun's humor gently broke through Aditi's guarded edges. Their connection started slow, almost hesitant. Aditi wasn't looking for love. She was still learning to trust herself again. But Arjun's presence didn't demand anything from her. He listened without interrupting, spoke without dominating, and never asked questions she wasn't ready to answer. On their third date, while sitting on a rooftop cafe overlooking the city, Aditi felt a rare openness. She took a breath and said, "There's something important you should know." She told him everything, not the dramatized version people whispered about, but the real story from her perspective. The grief, the betrayal, the truth she revealed, the fallout, the rebuilding. Arjun didn't flinch. He didn't try to fill the silence with empty reassurance. He simply reached across the table, held her hand gently, and said, "What you went through would have broken most people, but you faced it with honesty. That's something extraordinary." Aditi felt something inside her soften, something she didn't realize had been hardened for so long. Their relationship unfolded with patience. Arjun introduced her to his 2 children slowly, first through photos, then brief meetings at cafes, then weekend outings. To her surprise, she grew fond of them. They asked her about her favorite foods, her job, her travels, and she found herself smiling more than she expected. Arjun's ex-wife, whom he shared cordial custody with, met Aditi for coffee one day. The conversation was respectful, cautious, but in the end, Arjun's ex-wife said, "As long as my children feel safe with you, that's all that matters. And they seem to adore you already." Aditi walked away from that meeting feeling a new sense of belonging she hadn't felt in years. Slowly, she realized something profound. She wasn't scared anymore. Not of love, not of trust, not of vulnerability. Arjun didn't replace her past. He helped her build something new, something she chose freely and consciously. By the 3rd year of their relationship, they had settled into an easy rhythm, shared breakfasts, weekend trips to Udaipur and Korg, long conversations past midnight. Aditi often found herself looking at Arjun and thinking, this is what peace feels like. 5 years after the unforgettable funeral in Pune, Aditi found herself standing on a hilltop in Mahabaleshwar, dressed in a simple cream-colored lehenga. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Around her stood only 30 people, the few who had remained steadfast through every upheaval of her life. Arjun stood at the aisle, smiling with a warmth that radiated through her. His children held baskets of marigold petals. Her uncle Rajiv, whose unwavering support never faltered, walked her forward with pride glowing in his eyes. Aunt Neelam, trying to hold back tears, adjusted Aditi's dupatta one last time before letting her go. The ceremony was intimate and heartfelt. Arjun promised to honor her strength, her gentleness, her resilience. Aditi promised honesty, patience, and partnership. There were no grand theatrics, just genuine vows spoken by two people who understood how fragile and beautiful second chances could be. Ria wasn't invited. Neither was Karen. Their absence didn't feel like a shadow. It felt like a boundary finally honored. At the reception, held in a beautifully decorated garden, Uncle Rajiv delivered a toast that silenced the room. Aditi has endured heartbreak that would crush most people, but she faced it with dignity, truth, and courage. Today, she stands not as someone defined by her past, but as someone who rebuilt her life with grace. Tears pricked Aditi's eyes, but they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of gratitude, of relief, of healing fully realized. Months later, Aditi visited her parents' grave on their death anniversary. She placed fresh jasmine flowers, cleaned the headstone, and sat on the grass quietly. The air was cool, the world around her peaceful. "I hope I made you proud," she whispered. "The funeral wasn't calm, I know, but the truth mattered. And because of it, I'm standing where I am today." She felt the wind brush gently against her hair, as if answering her. Walking away from the cemetery, she carried a sense of closure she had never felt before. Not the kind born from forgiveness, but the kind born from growth, truth, and the courage to choose a better life. Her story was no longer defined by betrayal. It was defined by the strength that came after. Viewers, after everything you've just witnessed in this story, the loss, the heartbreak, the raw betrayal that unfolded right when a woman was grieving her parents, it forces us to stop and ask some truly uncomfortable, deeply human questions. Questions many of us avoid because the answers say something about the nature of people, about the ways relationships fracture, and about how far some individuals can go when blinded by desire, selfishness, or emotional confusion. Why do people do this? Why do some cross lines that should never be crossed, even when those lines are drawn by love, loyalty, and basic human decency? What makes a person choose betrayal over honesty, secrecy over compassion, and impulse over integrity? What's happening in the mind of someone like Ria, someone who claims to love her sister, yet still chooses to sleep with her sister's husband? And why does someone like Karen, who vowed to protect and cherish Aditi, decide instead to betray her at the most vulnerable moment of her life? Is it something broken inside them? Is it the thrill of doing something forbidden? Is it the temporary illusion of feeling wanted, appreciated, or alive? Or is it simply the inability to think beyond the present moment? Viewers, ask yourself this. Why didn't Ria think even once about the consequences? Why didn't she pause to imagine Aditi's pain, her grief, her trust? Why didn't she remember the countless moments Aditi protected her, supported her, and stood by her throughout their entire lives? And what about Karen? A grown man, intelligent, respected, admired. What was going on in his mind when he carried his coffee mug into his dead-in-law's home? What was he thinking when he laughed with Ria, when he shared wine with her, when he stepped into a bed that belonged to the parents of the woman he married? Did he convince himself it was harmless because no one would know? Did he justify it with excuses? Our marriage has problems. I deserve happiness. This is just temporary? Or was it something darker? A total absence of empathy at that moment? Viewers, betrayal doesn't start big. It starts small. A message, a secret conversation, a moment of emotional weakness that people refuse to stop. And when they keep going, they don't just betray a partner, they betray themselves. They betray their upbringing, their values, the people who trusted them, the family that raised them. Why do people risk everything, their marriage, their relationships, their reputation, for something that almost always crumbles later? Is it because they think they won't get caught? Is it because they're trying to fill a void inside that nobody else can see? Or is it because temptation blinds them so badly that even the most sacred places, like the home of a woman's deceased parents, become nothing more than a hidden meeting ground? Think about Rhea and Karen entering the house, viewers. Think about them unlocking the door, knowing it wasn't theirs. Imagine them passing the photographs on the walls, pictures of Aditi and Rhea as children, pictures of the very people who had just died. Yet they continued. They didn't stop. Not even once. What does that say about the human mind when someone is caught in an affair? Do they ignore morality? Do they silence guilt? Do they tell themselves, I deserve this? Or is it simply the belief that love or lust justifies everything? And another question for you. Why do people always say it just happened after they betray someone? Nothing just happens. Affairs take planning. They require secrecy, lies, coordination, opportunities. They grow in the shadows people choose to create. So, viewers, I want to know your thoughts. Why do people hurt the exact ones who would have done anything for them? Why do some ignore the voice inside that says, stop, you're going too far? Why do people choose betrayal over loyalty, even knowing they'll shatter someone's life? Tell me your perspective. Do you think it's emotional weakness? Entitlement? Selfishness? Lack of maturity? Or something deeper, a hole inside them that they keep trying to fill at any cost? Share your views in the comments. Your opinions matter because stories like these happen in real life more often than we think. And understanding why people betray is the first step to protecting yourself from it. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. We'll meet you next time.